Hello everyone and welcome back to Replay, the show where games are art. We're continuing with Final Fantasy VI, advancing the plot here in Famasa by staying in the inn, which, now that Strago approves of us, is really cheap. This is a fun little sequence. It works well as an excuse for us to figure out for the characters to figure out what's already blatantly obvious to the player, that the Mysidians have magic. Disasters are useful for that. Other than that, it's a strangely unmotivated segment. By that I mean it's not particularly unified with the rest of the game. It's really got no foreshadowing, no connection with the larger plot, no long-lasting repercussions other than we now know about magic and Strago knows to trust us. It's basically a mandatory side quest, which is a strange thing to be. Still, it does allow for a fairly neat segment that's heavily elementally based, which there aren't actually a lot of in this game. You don't, for instance, get an ice dungeon. There's that one chunk of Narsh, but that's a couple of screens, and not all the enemies are ice-themed, whereas this is going to be all fire. I also do like that they tie in gameplay with this scene. When we eventually get Strago in our party, we'll see the one ability he has is water-based. One of the very few water-based moves in the game, actually. So, fits well with him trying to put out the fires here. He has that power. Now, one thing that's interesting here is the mere fact that I keep wanting to call them Mysidians, but they're Famasans. The mere fact that they exist, even though the War of the Magi was 1,000 years ago, suggests that magical ability is passed down. Even though it's only acquired by being learned from Magicite, it seems that you can also be born with it by having a parent who could use magic. What's interesting about this is that for Terra, she has magic because she has an Esper parent. But it appears that having a parent who can use magic at all, even if they're an ordinary human, gives the descendants magical abilities of some sort. Now, we don't see how it works for the other Famasans, but at least for the two who join the party, their magic is in non-standard forms. Strago does not learn spells automatically the way Terra and Celeste do. He doesn't learn the magic command at all unless you give him an Esper. Instead, he gets the lore ability, which is blue magic. Which is a Final Fantasy tradition. It's been in... I can't remember if it was introduced in 5 or 3. I think it was introduced in 5. So that'd be one game before this. But it's basically the ability to copy and use enemy skills. It's handy. In 5, it was really, really very, very powerful. I can't remember what the other game where it's really powerful is. But there's definitely been multiple games in the series where it's a very powerful ability. This one, not so much, but that's because literally everything else pales in comparison to magic, which is tremendously powerful in this game. Which some people have complained about, but I think it fits in with the plot. The whole idea is that magic is this kind of nuke, essentially. which again ties in interestingly with it being inherited. Um, magic, basically, magic users being around magic causes someone's offspring to have weird abilities. That's the logic behind, a number of fantasy / sci-fi post-apocalyptic style settings, which, remember, this game is post-apocalyptic. The War of the Magi was an apocalyptic event that left the world devastated, but there's been 1,000 years of recovery since. So we passed through the post-apocalyptic period. The Thomasins are essentially the mutants, the people with strange powers inherited from the war, and they've made a place of their own. They can live in isolation and peace. Now, they are knowledgeable about their ancestry. They are knowledgeable about Espers. So as I mentioned last time, I think it's at least plausible that Gestalt visited here and learned from them about Espers and the Esper world and so forth. That's not really their fault. Clearly they try to keep their magic secret, they're just very bad at it. But it is, for a number of reasons, which I'll be getting into. Actually, I don't think I'll have time by that point, because there's going to be a lot happening at once a little bit later on. So, or in rapid succession anyway. So actually, I'm going to talk about it now. We're eventually going to find out the origins of the Espers. Between information given in this game not very well, it's one of the few areas where later translations are actually better, and supplementary information. There was a war before the War of the Magi, and the Espers were created in that war from humans. They were created as essentially slaves to fight their war. That means Espers and humans share a common origin, because Espers were once human. Oh, that's not a fight these to get into the room. There's no room. Oops. Anyway, Espers were once human, and that has a lot of implications for Terra, for starters, but it also has implications for why these abilities are passed down in families, that the inheritance of abilities from Esper parentage is ultimately the same thing as the inheritance of abilities from magic using human parentage, because an Esper is just basically someone who's more severely mutated by magic. That, in turn, makes the nuclear reading of magic in this game even stronger. It behaves like nukes in speculative fiction. The kind of nuclear power, nuclear radiation that can cause ants to grow to gigantic size. It's not really rooted in physics so much as in the cultural positioning of nukes, the fears they engender. That's really what magic is being used as a metaphor here, is how dangerous and powerful nukes are, how they transform things, the impact of radiation, of mutation and poisoning and so on. And once we start looking at it that way, we actually see it in a lot of places. You see it in the monsters. Cute touch there, by the way. They mentioned that there were a ton of fire rods being stored in this house, but the intact chest we find is the ice rod. Why? Well, maybe the iciness of it protected the chest? Regardless, the fire turns out to be coming from this creature. Or it might not be a creature. What exactly it is and where it came from isn't at all clear. One possibility is that it's a creature that was drawn to the fire rods and set off all this fire because it wanted to eat fire rods, hence Flame Eater. Another possibility is that the fire rods caught fire, the magic interacted in some way to come alive. Because that's kind of the danger of magic in this kind of construct, where we're talking about it as nuke, as a, oh hey, Terra actually got to do something while morphed. Wow. But yeah, we talk about it as being nuke-like, as being this great power that can transform and alter living things. That's what might be going on here, that these bombs and the fire eater, flame eater, and so on are being spawned by the amount of magic contained in this house. Which again has implications for the origins of the monsters in this world, of the Espers, that they're creatures altered by magic, rendered more magical, rendered strange and powerful and dangerous. Oh, great, it's got reflect. Okay. I think Aqua Ray will cut through that. Yep, looks like it does. Awesome. And it's dead. But yeah. What we essentially have here is the reaction went out of control. Too many fire rods being stored in one place caused this conflagration. Well, what happens if you store too many nuclear rods in one place? You get something like a meltdown. You get bad stuff happening that involves high temperatures. This is really where the game's, for lack of a better way of putting it, the game's fears are located. Or one of the places. Interesting, too, that one of the most thoroughly non-magical characters, Shadow, is the one who rescues us here. Now, the reason I refer to him as thoroughly non-magical is that in previous games, ninjas got access to ninja magic, elemental powers that were magical and inherent to being a ninja. Shadow doesn't. Shadow gets items that replicate some of them, but he never actually gets those magical powers on his own. Obviously, he can learn magic from Espers, but that's it. So he acts, not to stretch the metaphor too far, but as the most thoroughly non-magical person present, he dampens the reaction. So yes, here we get the backstory I was talking about from myself. The Mage Warriors had descendants, and they have magical power. We also get confirmation that after the War of the Magi, the Espers fled into their sealed world. And the people who could use magic were despised and hunted. Terra's not comfortable hearing that. But it's honestly not really that surprising. As we'll learn, the War of the Magi did involve enslaving Espers to use as weapons, killing Espers to take magicite from them and use as weapons. The mage warriors were not nice people. Does that mean that everyone who knew how to use magic deserved to be slaughtered en masse? Probably not. There were probably plenty of people who were in situations like Terra or Celeste, where they were in, or not Terra, but Celeste and Kefka, where they were imbued with magic at a young age. And of them, Celeste is not evil. Kefka, of course, is. Now, interesting about the mountains to the west, that's the place where the Espers were born. That's an interesting claim to make. And we'll be getting into, as we explore that next area, which of course is where we go next, talking about what happened there, where the Espers come from, and so on, and how that has significance for the story. But first, Shadow leaves because he's Shadow. This is actually completely ridiculous. He joined us on the ship, so the first point at which we could use him was arriving at the island where Thomasa is located. There is no way to leave that island without advancing the plot, and there's there's nothing you can do with him except walk to Thomasa and then do this stuff. It is the least useful Shadow ever is in the entire game, and it's kind of hilarious. And again, we get the bit of Interceptor liking Realm, and Realm being kind of emotional about this. There's, of course, a lot going on there, which, of course, if you've played the game before, you probably already know, but I'll get into it in a later episode when it starts getting revealed. In the meantime, let's go to the mountains to the west. So, here we are, the beginning of this dungeon. And we walk directly into a fight with some really weird enemies. Slime worms, I guess? I think I've commented on this before, but I love the weirdness of the enemy design in this game. It's very well done. And now we've picked up the Heal Rod, which is an item I find absolutely hilarious. I get what the idea behind it is, which is that it's a magical rod that has healing properties instead of properties of violence. Seems reasonable enough. However, what makes it really funny, to me, as we're about to see, is the animation for it. Which I'll give a minute to have a reason to use it. Oh, god damn it, I hate that ability. Sneeze is quite possibly the most annoying ability in any Final Fantasy game, because it's basically this person is removed from the fight. No experience. Oh, and here we go. Animation-wise, it looks like he's conking them over the head, and that somehow causes them to be less damaged. It's wonderful. And since its damage is magic-based, Strago is now an amazing healer, despite not knowing any cure spells. At least an amazing healer for this point in the game. But yes, Sneeze is an incredibly annoying ability. Unless I'm much mistaken, Locke gets nothing from this fight. He doesn't get experience or magic. And I can't use him during the fight because the enemy just arbitrarily decided to knock him away. That sucks. And now we come to something interesting. The birthplace of the Espers, apparently. Now, the way this scene is written, it sounds like these are themselves the statues, but that's not actually true. These are idols representing, oh hey now, statues. As they put it, the goddesses of magic. Three divine beings who are the source of all magic. And this is kind of the additional backstory. The goddesses are the source of all magic in the world. They came to this world for unknown reasons and started fighting each other. They transformed humans into the first Espers and enslaved them and used them to fight one another. However, eventually they decided this was a bad idea. The level of devastation was too much, so they got together. They gave the Espers free will, and they mutually and simultaneously transformed themselves to stone. They still function as the source of all the world's magic. Oh hey, Ultros. Yeah, it's been a while since Ultros shows up, so he randomly shows up. But yes, when they refer to the birthplace of the Espers, given that backstory, it doesn't make sense for the Espers to have had one birthplace. You would expect them to be each born wherever each of the three goddesses had their bases or whatever. What I think is that this is the place where the goddesses transformed to stone and gave the Espers their free will. And the Espers left idols of the goddesses behind when they departed and took the goddesses with them and took up the mantle of protecting the goddesses, which is a big part of what they're doing behind the sealed gate, as Strago mentioned. Now then, the whole War of the Magi happened, but that is essentially what I think happened. I think this is the place where the goddesses gave them their free will and became stone. The goddesses were moved in the course of the chaos of the War of the Magi, which would explain why there was so much chaos. And then death and destruction. So, on to fighting Ultros. He does this thing where he creeps forward from time to time, and then as you attack him, he creeps backwards again. I honestly have no idea if this is a mechanic where he's, like, trying to hit us, like trying to reach us, and then going to do something incredibly nasty, the way the wall in FF4 did, or if it's just Ultros being silly. Could go either way, honestly. Note, by the way, that Ultros both has a point in the fight at which he starts casting protective spells on himself, and a point where he turns red and starts unleashing nasty elemental stuff, which is basically guaranteed, or near guaranteed, death on the target. I'm also amused that his tri-elemental attack only involves 2 elements. And in fact, unless I'm much mistaken, Lodestone is classified as a non-elemental attack, which is pretty funny. But yeah, Ultros basically attacks us here because the game feels the need to have a boss fight, and there's no particular reason to have a boss here, so Ultros randomly appears. Until you wail on him enough to have Realm show up. And, you know, this game's slightly odd sense of humor. We get this odd but really kind of charming sequence where Realm plays up the innocent child angle. Realm is frankly being blatantly manipulative here. But in an absolutely entertaining way. I mean, she threatens suicide in a petulant, apparent tantrum as part of her scheme to convince Ultros to let her draw him. It's very silly and mostly serves as an introduction to her sketch ability, which is the first pretty much unique power in the game. Now, Dance also was kind of new-ish because it combines elements of... And you know what? I take that back. Even ignoring Dance, because Gao, much as I try to forget him, exists. And so Rage is a unique ability as well. But in both cases, we get pretty lengthy introductions to the new ability. In this case, this whole sequence serves as an introduction to Realm's sketch ability. It's also basically the only time in the game where it's useful because, as we just saw, it misses a lot. But once we actually manage to pull it off, it's a pretty cool concept. It creates a copy of the enemy that attacks the enemy with the enemy's own power. The downside of this is, of course, a lot of enemies are immune to or healed by their own powers because of elemental stuff. But it still brings Realm into the party, and which is great because Realm is a powerhouse. She's incredibly powerful in combination with Strago, because she eventually gains the ability to control enemies and can thus force them to use their abilities on him, allowing him to learn those abilities. And she is, at high levels, magically the most powerful character in the game, because she starts out with really strong, base magic, gets access to a lot of equipment that improves her magic, and because you get her relatively late, we can focus on teaching her the most powerful spells, whereas it's basically inevitable that most of the rest of the cast that are good at magic will have some crappy spells, like, ice or fire. Whereas you can concentrate on just giving Realm the best stuff, send her into the Colosseum, and have her be Death Incarnate. Plus, she's one of only 2 characters that can equip the Memento Ring, which is pretty good in certain segments of the game, against certain bosses. So yeah, I like Realm a lot. Plus, you know, she's got a kind of cute, quirky character design. She's just kind of an all-around nifty character. And for whatever reason, I find her 10,000 times less annoying than Gao. I mean, she does essentially lack any backstory, not backstory, but any story arc whatsoever, but she's neat. So we're getting to the end of this dungeon now, and it's time to run into some Espers. Yes, Rome, they are. Now this is actually a kind of interesting detail. So initially the Espers are aggressive. And note that a couple of them are straight up dragons, kind of implying that, you know, suggesting the monster-Esper connection. Maybe monsters are descended from non-human, non-sapient creatures, animals and such, that the goddesses imbued with power for their wars. Maybe they're kind of like the Mage Knights. They're transformed by exposure to magic. Either way, it's neat. And then we get this kind of interesting thing where they communicate in much the same way that Terra and Tritalk did. This sort of communication via magic. The ability of Espers to do that may explain why their society seems so much less structured than humans. Now, they say once in our world they lost control of our powers, but I think it would be more accurate to say that they lost control of their rage. I guess it's possible that, given the same thing happened to Terra, that something about the world is different, as Strega puts it, but given the level of guilt the Espers display here, I think it's at least partially how angry they were. I mean, Terra went on the same kind of loss of control, but she didn't kill anyone. She didn't level any cities. The Espers did. And we're teleported back to Thamasa to talk to Leo and Celeste. And this is something which really none of the prior games had done. FF5 sort of toyed with it a little at the end of the first world, where Galef went back to his own world and left everyone else behind, but that was a deeply unsatisfying ending. This feels like it could be the ending of a much shorter game. We made peace with the Empire, we found the Espers, we made peace with them. It could work as the end of a very differently structured game, one which did not build to a climactic battle with a final boss. But that's just not really how video games are structured, is it? you do need some kind of final climactic confrontation, and Ultros just doesn't cut it as one. That actually sort of justifies, retroactively, having Ultros as the boss of the previous segment. He's ridiculous, and thus presages the arrival of someone also ridiculous. And here we get what was, of course, the Empire's plan from the start. Find the Espers, draw them out with offers of peace, and then smash the village, smash the Imperials willing to pursue peace, smash the Returners, kill the Espers, and take their Magicite. And Kefka here displays a pretty terrifying power, the ability to instantly kill Espers. Now, it's possible he learned Doom or Exo somewhere, but it's also possible that this is just what his kind of unique ability is, his equivalent to Celeste's Runic, that he kills. Which again lends a bit of credence to the idea that Celeste was created as an emergency means of controlling Terra or Kefka, using her runic to counteract their much more straightforwardly destructive abilities. And now Leo is the last one standing. Yeah, you can't do anything with him. In terms of equipment or anything like that. He's basically the same level as the rest of your party. Has pretty solid stats. He has Fight and Shock, which, despite its appearance, is not a magical ability. Like most of the Blitzes, it's based on physical prowess, I believe. But it's cool. And yeah, trying to fight any of the, what's it called? Magitech armors is completely futile. You just have to go straight for Kefka. Oh yeah, he's got an offering equipped by default. That allows you to hit 4 times with your weapon instead of once. So he's pretty bloody potent. Kefka, meanwhile, is hitting us with pretty solid, ugly spells. His fondness for poison continues. We saw that in Doma, we saw that in the fight with him in Narsh, and now we see it again. He likes poison. Which is, of course, a dishonorable weapon. It helps demonstrate the degree to which he and Leo are unalike. And this is just evil. Kefka taking the form of the stall in order to catch Leo off guard. And unfortunately, this is what empires do to the honorable, loyal servant who won't do the things that an empire ultimately has to do to preserve itself and to expand. I say has to because if it ceases to do so, empires tend not to last very long. which is better for everyone, except the people in charge of the Empire. But the people in charge of the Empire tend not to like it. So, have to use it big quotes. And yeah, Kefka's just going berserk here. He's laughing while screaming his hatred, murdering Leo, and now comes a frankly terrifying aftermath to that. I have to tell you, on the Super Nintendo, this was a mind-blowing sequence. This was difficult to believe the degree to which things are now going wrong. It's also, for the era, an unusually long time for the player to have essentially no control. But that ties us back into the beginning. This game is good at making the player feel helpless when it needs to. Obviously, a game which makes you feel too helpless ceases to be fun as a game. But these moments of helplessness, like when you have no choice but to follow the path as Terra at the beginning of the game, or now, when we can do nothing to interfere with this sequence of events. You know, later games use cutscenes just because they look cool. This game is using them as a way of deliberately taking control away from the player as part of its project of forcing the player to experience things that they would not normally experience as part of the game. Yeah. Creates this, like, anti-magic thing, which note that it kills the Magitech as well as, disabling the abilities of the Espers. And then he just starts draining their, murdering them and taking their Magicites. And keep in mind, with every Magicite he gets, Kefka has the opportunity to become more powerful. He's going to very shortly be a powerhouse. Already, the Espers can do nothing to harm them. This being of obviously pure fire hits him with everything it has, and it doesn't harm him at all. But as I was saying, the player is helpless. That's what... Oh, interesting. That does have a very similar visual effect to X-Zone. So that kind of makes sense. Sorry I keep interrupting myself, but yeah, the player has no control. The player is forced into this feeling of just helplessly watching as Kefka wreaks havoc and ascends to power. And this is not the last time, by any means, the game will do this to the player. It really does make the scene powerfully effective. Especially, as I said before, this game came out at a time when lengthy cutscenes were very much a rarity. This one this long was almost unheard of, let alone the length of, say, the game's ending. And it's really not clear why Terra latched on to Leo so quickly. Something about him drew her to see him as someone she could learn from. But as the game does in a few places, it sort of sketches the outlines of something and leaves the player to fill it in. Personally, I think it's that he somehow reminded her on some subconscious level of a parent. He's a father to his men type, and Terra has never really had a parent, so it's possible that she latched onto him in that respect. Regardless, she does feel a distinct sense of loss at his death. A little odd that Celeste doesn't, given that they were co-workers, but okay, we're focusing on Terra right now. It's also interesting that in the immediate aftermath of this lengthy sequence of helplessness, we find out about an adventure the rest of the party had while we weren't around, where Edgar managed to, seduce a waitress, essentially, or maid, and learn the impending harm, their impending doom at the hands of the Empire, and escape on the airship. We now get Strago and Realm as permanent party members. And frankly, a disturbing scene between Edgar and Realm, given Edgar's... It's kind of amusing that everyone freaks out about Realm threatening to paint a portrait. But yeah, any interaction between Edgar and a small girl is a bit... the way he responds to her hair is a little creepy. Him asking how old she is, because of the little girl in Figaro Castle. If it were not for that little girl, things would be a lot easier. But regardless, gonna save here. See y'all next time as we continue on with the game. Bye!